working. The YouTube is negotiating with Zoom. Once that does that, I'm going to start my local record. Okay, that's working. And what do you know? The microphone was already turned off, so I didn't get the usual feedback.
Hey.
And now I'm also recording locally.
And your GoPro's beeping.
Yes, exactly.
We all know that tune.
I don't even know I have it on now. It didn't like something here.
Yeah. Great. Well, welcome everybody to the program. We'll get started officially in just a moment. We'll probably give folks another minute to settle in and then get going without further ado.
Everybody wants to hear my beeping. GoPro, turn off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yep. Yeah, the voice controls are kind of there sometimes. All right, I think I'm gonna kick us off. So
Okay,
let's do this here.
I will spotlight you. There you go. Take us away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robin Martin. I'm Vice President of SDMediaPros, and welcome to this special pilot event that we are calling What's New With. We are trying out some new lunchtime events here to see if that helps us get on people's schedules or bring a quick discussion that might be of value to our members. So during the course of this discussion, we're going to have some great presentations for you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things right over to our CFO, Bob Unger, to introduce our presenters and set us up for the rest of the meeting. So Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Robin. Jane, did you want to say anything first, or you?
Nope, that was it, Bob. Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you for attending. This all sort of got started. Paul is in a Toastmasters club with me. I'm a retiree from Sony. And when I saw that we had someone that was in the cinema line from Sony, and Sony was also introducing the new FX3, I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to nab somebody to present to our people here in SDMediaPros. And Paul was gracious enough to grant my wish that he give a presentation to us. And I also said that I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the technology that's in it. And he got Shapur to be able to come in and talk to us about some of the AI technology. I know that most people really hate autofocus, but on the other hand, when you're on a gimbal, sometimes you don't have the ability to be sitting around reaching and doing the focus as you're trying not to trip over things, etc. And some of the new artificial intelligence can help solve some of those problems. So without any further ado, I would turn the program over to Paul so we can make this short and sweet, and he will then turn it over to Shapur and we'll have Q&A at the end. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, thank you, Bob. And that is a perfect background to how we get introduced to organizations quite often. We always like to be available for organizations like yourself in order to continue the conversation as to why we put certain features in. And of course, I commend you all on the feedback that you supply to your either resellers or us directly, because it is how we ultimately make our products continuing to evolve with the Japanese engineering team. So today we have a selection of cameras called Cinema Line. And our goal today is really to bring you through the breadth of product and then focus a little bit more on one or two specific features that may impact your way of production. So with this slide here, you can see the various products, and we'll go into more detail on each. I will say that myself, I've been part of the Sony Cinema team as Sony's reorged in a way for about the last 3 years and brought Venice to the market. So I'm based out of New York, which had a tremendous amount of episodic as well as documentary type of form shooting. So many of these cameras, whether they originated with the Venice product, as we sought out episodic and TV, or the FX3 as we start to reinvigorate the documentary market, are definitely all in my backyard here. But we have Shapur that's based on the West Coast, as well as several other representatives not on today's call. Shapur, I'm going to see if I have access to you. I do. Great. Sort of doing slide advances there. So what we're working on is really building a tool set for cinematic expression, right? The cinema line consists of features that are consistent across all the products to achieve the branding of a cinema camera. I'll be the first to share with you that all the cameras have great capabilities across the entire line. You'll see, though, that some of our cameras now benefit from what we learned on other models, whether higher or lower of a level, and incorporate these capabilities into their design. So let's just go over on screen what you could expect across the entire cinema line, almost holistically, aside from a few exceptional features that you'll see with autofocus. But full frame Super 35, and I'm just going to call out a few of these. Uninterrupted high resolution internal recording. No need to necessarily go out to a third party recording with many of these. ND filters built into the camera in large range, and great for high frame rates so that you could work with one platform across multiple different acquisition styles. So high frame rate as well. So let's go into hopefully the next slide advance. Okay, so as we look at our full frame technology across this entire product line, the key feature of the cinema line is the full frame sensor, and the benefits are unmistakable. So full frame sensors offer the opportunity to narrow the depth of field by maximizing the creative possibilities of a large aperture lens. So with the combination of the lens and the maximum aperture, as well as the full sensor technology, it's definitely easy to achieve the very narrow depth of field as you could see in these two shots. The desired aesthetic is often what people refer to as the cinematic look, right? Shallow depth of field being the cinematic look, hence the line being called cinema line as well. While 24p cadence and skin tone are also certainly part of the role of 24p, it does seem that this is the most defining factor. So I would assume we're all familiar with cadence of 24p with the introduction of the F900 back in the day, and on through our cameras. 24p represented that motion that we would expect. Skin tones, though, came up with our Venice camera, where we started to have a very pleasing skin tone as well as highlights and backgrounds. So now, isn't that what we're all after, is basically creating the best image we possibly can in the camera. And that's what we're offering in the cinema line. You could see in comparison, the Super 35 or even down to the 1/3 inch chip has a drastic difference in physical size compared to full frame. And I often reference this as sort of a pinhole camera aspect. If you ever operate with a little box of a pinhole camera, as you move that back plane forward and back, you're going to increase your rear plane image. And in this case, we are basically pulling the plane further away, being full frame. So it's amazing to have full frame as an option on all of these cameras. Next slide. And Shapur, maybe I'll just ask you to control that slide rather than my advancement, because it seems to lag. Thank you. So let's talk a little more about full frame sensors and what else we could do with them. So since a full frame sensor is bigger than Super 35, it naturally captures a wider image. Shooting from the same camera position with the same lens, a full frame camera could allow you to see more of the scene for creative situations. In this example here, you'll see that the Super 35 image using a particular lens was only able to have an angle of view that was limited compared to the full frame. So where does this play in? Perhaps it plays in by just proximity to subject in a documentary form factor, or perhaps it comes in at a wide vista that a cinematographer is basically looking to create with a full frame look. Next slide, Shapur. Okay, so with all that background, I introduce you to the cameras that are identified as cinema line. So we deliver the coveted Sony look in combination with the enhanced operability and reliability that makes the difference. Well, that's basically the marketing version of saying that these cameras are basically able to be matched in a unique environment where basically down to the most compact system on through to our largest cinema camera, we basically have genres and support throughout the entire lineup of formats. Some of those areas would include digital cinema production, documentary style production, independent, which kind of covers all the areas, as well as compact cinematography for a lightweight form factor for many reasons. So let's advance slide if you don't mind, Shapur. Let's look at what the industry has been using to date. The FS5 and the FS7 are very commonly found cameras in today's market. More recently, we've also added the Alpha A7S Mark III, which added tremendous amount of feature sets. And once again, with the eye chart of feature sets, I won't hit on every single one, but let's look at what the FS5 did. It became really the first choice, FS series really, the first choice for long form shooting based on its design. Backed with great cinema features, this quickly took basically a standard position in that type of acquisition. So users also discovered the power of the alpha cameras and progressed to the A7S, whether they were a early A7 adopter or a FS series user that had been brought over to the A7S M3 based on its features. So a couple things that I would like to call out. Our FS5 and our FS7 were based on Super 35mm sensors. So of course we talk about that in the earlier slides, that it's transitioned to full frame. Dynamic range, you can see that these cameras were quite capable already of 14 stops of deepest blacks to whitest whites. And we were able to do things like support news groups with XDCam 50. But there were some things that we were long in the tooth on, things like contrast-based autofocus. This is an autofocus that's quite old, but yet was still efficient. And so we really didn't see it being utilized too much. And on the A7S M3, we started introducing things like hybrid autofocus and additional dynamic range, as well as being able to operate in a full frame sensor mode. So it really started to introduce things that we knew we needed in this area, but just weren't designing in one particular camera yet. Shapur, can you advance slide? And advance twice more, and it'll lay them all out. Thank you. So this is the lineup as it stands. It's the FX3, and I really love this slide. As much as I call these my teleprompters in a sense, whenever I'm working with slides, it really is quite a good read off here, because when you start with the FX3, you get a tremendous amount of features, whether it be 4K 120, whether it's 2398 frame rate that's often needed for delivery, a true cooling fan, and XLR inputs, and even record tally. That's something that we don't always recognize in our more compact form factors. But when you start to say, I want more items in the particular camera, you see the FX6 would start to introduce the very popular variable ND filter. We also categorize the high sensitivity of this camera with two based ISOs. So we could begin at a very low sensitivity camera for the best noise reduction, everything else, without having to use ND filters. And then we could also go to a higher ISO that will basically be able to represent similar noise levels, if not exact noise levels, and then start to use ND to adjust from there. The quote with this, of course, is that people often say they could shoot further into the dusk hours and everything else while basically not affecting their production schedule. So really fantastic thing to have the introduction of ND filters based into the FX6. There's also the environment for multicam. And when we think of multicam, we may need timecode in out and SDI signals. And so you can see the FX3 really brings together the crossover of our two different worlds. The FX3 moving on to the FX6 brings in that introduction. So then we have what is largely the standard for reality TV, FS7, and its next generation being the FX9. Here we have the benefits of a 6K sensor subsampled down to our 4K recordings. We have great features like being able to scan Super 35, So if anybody has legacy lenses, they could use the legacy lenses. We have the ability to load external LUTs, as well as things for documentary film producers or nature producers, like picture cache recording. So, and this is also the first camera that we offer at this level to be controlled by an RCP. So this will bring this camera into a multi-camera paint studio environment with usage of our RCP controls, remote control panels. So quite an advanced camera, and you can see that none of these fall directly into one of the categories we spoke of. They fall into all of them, and it depends how you plan on using it. Next slide, Shapur. Thank you. So I feel obligated to mention the Venice camera because I spent so much time with it, and it still is viable for all types of productions. We've had commercials being shot with it, not just Hollywood features. And here we still get great anamorphic modes. We get the ability to work with PL or E-mount systems. There's a side panel that is really designed on the camera to work with the second operator to basically be able to key in key settings as they go through. And we're able to record onboard raw recording, which is something that I think groups often expect to have to go to an external recorder for. That's what we've done in our FX and FS series. So fantastic device at the top of the chain with the Venice. Next slide, please. And Shapur, I think you'll need to advance through. Thank you. So as we just share some photos of the cinema line, it really is to create all types of, the cinema line is to support all types of production, whether it be digital cinema, the documentary market, independent, or really the new format that we've created with a Pro Camera ultra portable compact camera systems. I think at this point, you probably would agree, each have its advantages based on the bullet points that we saw previously, and can be fully interchangeable on set productions, field shooting, sidelines, and breaking news. So next slide, Shapur. So with the introduction of the Cinemaline's FX9, we revisit something that perhaps had gotten forgotten for a while. The ENG or EFP type of production shooting with cinema cameras. For so long, we've had shoulder mount cameras that operate in a fashion of basically large zoom lenses, able to cover a lot of area and robust medias, using to basically get the content out to a delivery very quickly. Well, thanks to these cameras, we actually have returned to EFP, and we could strongly say that news magazines, reality TV, and even sports production have adopted the camera for that fashion. Some of the bullet points listed here obviously give them that ability to work in this fashion. So we have zoom lenses. We have zoom lenses in cinema. That just seems so foreign in the cinema language. But we have a grip that can actually, ramp up what speed you want to actually torque that zoom as. So it's really interesting. And then we have S-Cinetone, which is basically all that stuff we said about beautiful skin tones and everything else that is desired in an image. We can record that directly to the cards on board, which is a huge advantage for any type of the production that basically needs to quickly turn the content. And as you can see, other things like proxy for workflows that news groups would need. Shapur, if you could advance slide. So I have this outlined as various segments, but one thing to recognize is that one camera serve all days has probably been something that no longer really applies. One camera serve all can work in the sense that maybe you select something and you bring, a machete to a knife fight. But, the thing is, we're really looking at a system that basically rely on purpose-driven cameras. So we have things that basically could go into small form factors. We often see that Venice cameras, the C cam will actually be an FX3, and perhaps an FX9 will have a Venice for some plate work or creation work of that sense. So there is no buying in at the high end and buying in at the low end, understanding the low end. It's really an entire breadth of product. Shapur, to advance 2 slides if you could. And so just to share last 2 slides or so of where our different products relate. So we have a couple different terms, right? We have compact and we have flexible. So those 2 terms obviously mean we could be in multiple environments with the camera with long record times and everything else. And that's where the FX3 sits in. But as you start to reach into deeper capabilities, you start to look towards the FX6 and the FX9 and really ultimately the Venice camera. And so again, today my goal was really to advance slide, please. Really just to give you an introduction to the breadth of product and hold a little bit of the technical related aspects to Shapoor's support. But if you have any questions before we enter into Shapoor's about our cameras, I'd be happy to review that. Otherwise, we definitely will give you some great technical information on this entire, some features across this entire product line. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just stop this. Perfect. A great presentation, Paul. Thanks, everybody. So again, my name is Shapoor Nosredi. I'm a senior sales support engineer for Sony Pro Camcorder Group. Some of my responsibility also includes the cinema line that Paul just gave us a great review, very high level, obviously, right? But we've talked to the team here, and obviously I know there are a few things we talk about autofocus. And one of the big believer, and I've been with Sony for about 20 years, so I'm going to try to simplify and go over some of the capability of these cameras. And I have seen the change and the conversion in people are becoming believers. So for years and years, I've dealt with the cinematographers and videographers, professional videographers and cinematographers that they never wanted to deal with anything auto, right? Especially autofocus. Why was that? Because the technology wasn't there and it wasn't as reliable. The other part of it is in a consumer world that you have some great thing that people call auto, full auto, right? So they turn on the full auto and they'll let the camera take over. And lots of the prosumer and consumer, they have sometimes good autofocus, but they kind of like take over, but don't give you too much control. So these are the main reason that a professional cinematographer and videographer never used autofocus, because not reliable, technology wasn't there, it didn't work as well, and it didn't give you control. It kind of like that you didn't want the device to take over. So since the FX9 introduction of FX9, FX9 was one of those revolutionary products again, and we've been very involved from the get-go with development of this camera. But it was great to see collaboration between different groups of Sony technologies, right? For years and years in the mirrorless cameras, like the Alpha series cameras, we had the best, undeniably the best autofocus in the market, right? And there are reasons for it. Obviously, we are one of the only manufacturers that we manufacture everything in-house, from the lens technology, from the chassis, from the we're the largest sensor manufacturer in the world. We know a thing or two about that. And then we manufacture our own DSPs, processing, as well as the software development, and even the codec. So we are a company that from nuts to bolt, everything it's done in-house, designed and manufactured, and all in-house. So that's part of the reason, especially like on alpha cameras for the past several years, we've become dominant with our introduction of the E-mount lenses, G and G Master lenses that we had in the market. I remember a few years ago, it was only 4 or 5 lenses. Now today we have, I believe, 62 or 63, Paul. I don't know if that's the correct number of E-mount lenses from Sony. And more than half of them are full frame lenses. So there are lots of lenses, but the autofocus, going back to that technology, it's really everything hand in hand together. And I think that's one of the biggest questions lots of you guys and lots of the operators that I talk to, they ask, will the autofocus work with other lenses and things like that? And obviously E-mount being one of the most versatile mounts that we use across all of our product, from our APS-C alpha line all the way to full frame and all the way to our Venice natively has an E-mount. So all of these, because E-mount is only 18mm flange tip and it's versatile, and you can really literally adapt it to any and every kind of lens in the market, and they're adapter for different type of lenses. But at the same time, what basically happens in the autofocus world, there are different protocol and technology, but it's not just the camera and the sensor that makes that reliable, fast autofocus happening. It's also the build of the lenses, the mechanics, how the optics move. We have the latest technology using XD linear motors that they can move precisely and fast and quietly, which makes it very unique for the cinema. And some of the lenses out there, they're still using a 30 or 25-year-old technology, moving gears or gear type of motors, or moving gears to move the optics. So to answer this was kind of like explain why I'm going to give this answer for the people that they ask, will it work with the other lenses? We as Sony, we say that if you are relying on the autofocus with these particular cameras that we're talking about, obviously we recommend the native lenses, the Sony G lenses, and all of them that they do support it. If there are other lenses, there are other things involved, the adapters you're using, if it has the latest firmware, the lens is supported, the autofocus protocol and everything, and then everything has to talk to each other, to the camera with the AI. There's multiple levels of calculation, processing, sensors, the lens movement, and the AI in the camera. All of it does multiple calculation to come up with that great and reliable autofocus that we have, right? So that's really a big part of it. So going back to FX9 was the first professional camcorder in our cinema line that actually adopted the technology we've had for years in our mirrorless cameras. But then obviously we got the look and the skin tone that Paul talked about from the Venice and the ergonomics of FS7, all of these, that they have been great products for us in the market. And we kind of combined the technologies together and created the perfect camera, perfect Swiss Army knife, I call it. The FX9 is my Swiss Army knife that has all of this, but the autofocus part of it came from our all alpha and mirrorless cameras. So that's where we started first seeing lots of the professional cinematographer and videographer not wanting to actually go. But once they saw the performance of it, we've seen lots of people that they were not a non-believer. Now they see how the life is much, much easier for them, how much time they're saving in their production, and they're falling in love with it. There's a situation that you're doing an interview and somebody's rocking back and forth. How is a focus puller manual is going to keep it that now basically the camera is able to track and follow up. So with that, let me actually have learned in the pandemic time to usually do this in person with lots of you guys at the event, but I've learned to kind of like switch my view. I've set up a small studio here. So this is the FX3, FX6, and FX9. So for purpose of showing the basically to you guys the autofocus features and talk quickly a little bit about it, I'm going to actually switch to the FX6 view. Let me just set it up here. Perfect. And so if you guys are looking at it, actually, this is the FX6, and I have the FX3 and FX9 here as well. But the autofocus feature, it's actually, I wanted to first go over that autofocus menu, which is under shooting menu and focus. And it's very similar across all different 3 products that we talked about, but the menus are a little bit different, and I talk about some of the differences in control. But as you see, the big part, what I mentioned earlier, it's the control that it gives you. For example, the transition speed, it gives you from 1 to 7 across all of these products now. Control of how fast do you want that autofocus transition. It would be if you want something fast, if you're shooting something really fast action, fast moving sports or something, and you want the autofocus quickly kick in place, you go fast. But if you want it to actually be more dramatic or creative, or rack focus or things like that, you can actually turn it to slow. And then also the autofocus responsiveness, right? It gives you, again, control. How many times you guys are trying to shoot something across the street on a building or something, and there are cars and other objects moving in front of you. You can actually have control of having responsive or lock-on autofocus, basically. So if you go to lock on and you're focusing on objects, anything goes in front of the camera, it's not going to hunt back and forth. It's not going to try to track that. So there are tools like this that gives you a little bit more control, that makes the autofocus really, really usable. Of course, again, there's ways that you have to set it. For example, all of these cameras that we talked about, they have almost the whole frame. It's covered with autofocus tracking, and that's really great. Lots of the other products with the autofocus in the market, they're usually about 60%, or you have to be dead center in the middle of the frame to be able to track autofocus. But in here, you have wide, which is almost 100% of the frame. I think it's like 94% vertically and 96% horizontally. But you can either have the whole frame track, you can have zones. So if you're doing an interview, if you see on the screen, there's that orange box, and I can actually move the orange box around. So you can actually select an area where the autofocus is going to track, or where it's going to avoid tracking an object. So if you're shooting and there's a moving object or a window or something, and you don't want the autofocus tracking to be distracted, again, gives you more control of how you can set that. The other mode, it was the flexible spot, and this is really great because, again, it gives you a lot smaller box and area. If you see on the screen right now, I have the can of Coke, and then you can actually move it with the move that bar with the arrow. As you see, I'm moving into the ball of sake, and that's the area. Remember, also having on a slow transition right now, but it's actually now only tracking within that box. This also gives you ability. Let me show you guys something here. So if you see on the screen, if I'm in this mode right now, and I have the box here, you can actually do touch. So I'm going to touch on the can of Coke, and you'll see on the picture, that's where it's tracking. I'm going to touch on the flower, and that's where it's going to do that. I'm going to touch on the faces back there and change the area of my autofocus. So it makes it really cool, really reliable to track only the object that you want and give you more control. So that's really the key that I was trying to talk about when you are talking about the autofocus capability. It gives you a lot of control. And then, of course, face and eye priority, and face and eye only and off. So it does a face tracking. It does a really great job of it, and it actually tracks, I think, up to about 8 faces. But if you look at right now the picture, if there was multiple people, you see some gray boxes as well. So you can recognize multiple people on the frame. But once you select one person, and you can actually click with the joystick or the select button on your camera, you see the double box right now. That means you registered that person. If you have multiple people on the frame, you can actually select your mate talent and register them in, and as they move across the frame or move forward or backward, it will actually follows them. And if they leave the frame, it's going to go to the next person, and then it's going to again come back as soon as they come back in a frame. Until if you choose, you want to select actually a different person, you can actually move the joystick or arrow. I'm moving there now, and I select a different person. Now that person is actually the one that it's locked in, and it's going to keep locking and tracking on that person. So again, there are tons and tons of tools like this. If you have to explain the focus, let me go back here. Focus face and eye only. Basically, what that means, if you wanted to have a mode that only track the faces, and if your talent or that person that you're shooting, he leaves the frame, it's going to go back to manual focus eventually, basically, literally, because then it doesn't track an object or anything else. But if you do face and eye priority, that's what it actually, when there is a face in the frame, it prioritizes that one, and it tracks the face. But if there is no face, then it'll go to the next object and still use the autofocus system. And of course, you can turn it off as well. So there are tons and tons. And another thing I wanted to quickly talk about was the ND filter that Paul mentioned. So that's kind of like the big difference when you move from the FX3 or alpha type cameras into a FX6 or FX9. Having an ND filter, it's really a big plus, because you can, I'm going to disengage the ND filter, and you guys see in the screen right now. And of course, I have the dual base ISO, as Paul mentioned, the high sensitivity mode. Obviously, as you see, it's crazy. So you need to engage the ND, right? So what I'm doing is, you can either manually dial in your ND in a very small increment. So this is perfect, because if you have the old-fashioned ND, you have 3 or 4, but if you needed something in between, plus you would have to stop recording, you couldn't basically switch it live. But in here, in a very small increment, as you guys can see, I'm actually dialing ND from 2 to 7 stop, from quarter ND all the way to 1/128. I don't know if you guys probably see on the bottom of the screen that that's where the indicator is, what the ND reading is right next to the time code. So the other great thing is you can actually have auto ND. So you let the camera take over. And as you see now, I'm wide open f1.8. And as I change, you see the ND is actually adjusting itself. If you look at that indication on the corner of the screen. And this works really great in a real life situation. Let's say you're doing a time lapse of sunset or sunrise. You can actually utilize this great feature, or if you're going constantly between indoor, outdoor, shade, and different exposure lighting situation, you let the camera take over. It actually a great tool. The backstory is when we initially introduced the FX9, the same cinematographer lady that you saw on one of the slides that Paul had, she used lots of big cinema camera that never used the variable ND filter, of course, right? So we were doing the sunset and sunrise, and this was like her jaw dropped as soon as she sees this, that she can do this. So it helped us. We went about 1.5 hours shooting the sunset without actually having to touch the camera. And for about maybe 40 minutes or so into it, then we finally had to start touching aperture and start closing it a little bit or opening it up. We did both sunset and sunrise. So this is actually also a great tool that I wanted to highlight. That's really a big difference when you move to FX6 and FX9. As Paul shared, each one of these are tools that give you different capabilities that you have. And one more thing, and I'll open it up to question. I wanted to show you guys. It's let Let's see if we can actually switch here. I gotta do a setup here quickly. So let me see. Yep. So I have now, I'm actually gonna do this. So you'll see this is the screen of my phone right now and the remote control capability on both cameras. So the FX6 or FX9, in this case, both cameras are connected to my home Wi-Fi, and you can actually have an ad hoc connection. So I'm going to select the FX6 on the screen, and I'm actually going to select monitoring. As you guys can see, this is a screen on my phone. You're looking in the left, and the small window, it's actually the camera running to my switcher right here. Of course, it's going through multiple HDMI switches and switcher and everything, so I can show you guys this. There is a little bit of lag, not that much though. When you look at it live, it's not a live monitoring, but it's a great producer monitor or monitor that you can actually use during the shoot. But the big thing, it's giving you control. So as you see on the bottom, I can touch in here and I could basically change it. You see the bar on the focus shows up on the side. I can actually focus in far and near, and it will actually give me that ability. I can go manual and autofocus, manual right now, and then I'm going to jump back to autofocus again. There is also zoom capability. If you have a servo zoom, you can actually zoom in. In this case, I don't have a servo zoom, but the FX6 has another great hidden gem that people don't usually use or know about. It's something called clear image zoom that we have in some of our cameras. Clear image zoom, it's not per se like your conventional digital zoom. It's using a database to basically use that to zoom in and zoom out using the oversampling from the sensor and imager that we have, plus the database that we have to interpolate pixels into image. So actually very usable and great, and you can zoom in about 1.5 times in 4K mode and about 2 times in HD. One thing that it's great, as you guys see, I can do this with the rocker of the camera, or I'm using the app right now to do that. This is a prime lens. I'm actually on the FX6 is a 55 prime that I'm using. And this could be any lens because it's happening in the camera. You can have a prime lens and still give you that ability that you can zoom in and zoom out. And all of this from the control of your app. And this is called the CBM app. And it's available both for Android and Apple. Now let's obviously switch back a little bit quickly, about a minute or two, about the FX3. And FX3, obviously, it's based on, and let me switch here. This is my FX3, and the FX3 is obviously based on the alpha cameras, more on the alpha cameras. So it actually, switch it here, there we go. So you guys can see it's actually, this is the imaging edge app, which you use with the alpha cameras, and it gives you similar functions, not as much control as the FX6 and FX9 will give you. So I'm going to connect here to my FX3, which is also again connected, and I've selected it previously, so the process of selecting. But as you see, again, it gives me some controls here, and it gives me some menu control and everything else. But what else this will give me actually is, if you look at the screen, if I touch something, you probably see a little bit of white dot that tells me, kind of like a mouse pointer, that I'm touching there on the screen. I'm actually touching the phone right now on the can of Coke, and I'm touching the phone. I'm not even touching the camera. So it's actually working by touching on the screen of your smartphone with the Imaging Edge app, and you can still do autofocus tracking. So again, another great tool with the autofocus. The camera is on a tripod and I'm not even near camera and I'm connected to the Wi-Fi with the app, and I can focus and touch back and forth and do, of course, other controls. As you guys can see here, it gives me some menu options with this as well. Somewhat, again, different between the FX6 and FX9 with the CBM app, and the FX3, similar to Alpha 7S3 and some of the other Alpha cameras, is based on the Imaging Edge app. So again, I know we're short on time and I can talk forever about these things, but I wanted to kind of like give you guys a little bit of background of some of the highlights of where these are coming from and show you guys, and hopefully that give you some useful new information that you could put these cameras to use. With that, I guess I'll open it up to questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. One question that I would have that I think sort of presented itself when the camera was first introduced is, when would someone want to use the A7 versus the FX3?
Okay, so the A7 and FX3, this is the A7S3, obviously, right? So one thing that you'll see is the A7S3, the bottom layout and the way that it's configured, it's both hybrid for video and still, but mostly it's still oriented, right? Because all the buttons are defined as more of the suitable for still type shooting, where the FX3 back here, if you notice, obviously has the handle built in already with the XLR and everything, but also it's more suitable for a video style shooting. And Paul showed a list of some of the things that it has, basically. Things like having a basically a tally in the back. I don't know if you guys can see, obviously, in the back over there, it came out like, I gotta turn my face detection. I guess it's doing a great job, by the way. This is an A7 III. It's shooting me. Maybe I cover my face and goes to the other place, but it's actually tally function. It does not have the viewfinder like the A7S III does, but more importantly, the buttons are oriented where mostly a video and video shooter is versus a still shooter. So you have your record button, multiple record buttons on top. You have a zoom lever in the front. So for the same thing that we talked about. So if you have a servo zoom, or if you have the clear image zoom, and let me switch here, I'm zooming in again. This is not a servo zoom. I believe I have a 2470 G Master on there on the FX3, but I can still, wherever I'm holding the zoom, I can still zoom in and zoom out with this camera with a clear image zoom again. So, but where you normally have on and off on the A7S III, you have the zoom lever over there that you can actually zoom in. And where the buttons are located, things like shutter, ISO control, and everything, instead of having all these different buttons in there, it has a suitable for a video shooter where your muscle memory knows where everything is. If you're holding a camera and shooting, you can easily access everything. So that's really the main thing. And the other thing is it actually has a different style body, more solid body, and it has quarter 20 screw holes on top, on the side. So essentially it does not really require to cage the camera to use with the accessories. As you guys can see, I've mounted a Ninja 5 on top of this. I have a bunch of accessories and I've mounted it without needing. There's quarter screws on sides, on top. There's the handle. You can remove the handle if you choose to, depending on how you're using it. But there's also screws on the back of the handle, on top of the handle, multiple point of installing the accessory, which again, it makes a camera great where you need to build up, and A7S III to KG-DOP. So really, this is the main difference. Hopefully that answers the question. It's more suitable if you're doing most of the time video versus hybrid or still mostly.
Or I'll add one other item to that. The FX3 is the most compact version in the cinema line of having an internal cooling fan. So many users speak about will the digital camera basically overheat? Will a still camera overheat when it's not designed to record for long durations? So this does have an active cooling in the FX3, whereas the A7 series is very good, but it is passive cooling. It is basically a radiator versus the system.
Yeah, and the A7S III, to add to that, I mean, it's improved drastically compared to some of the other cameras out there, the new cooling system it has, but absolutely right. So lots of people keep saying that, oh, well, it does get hot. Yeah, when you're running the processor, that processor and this system, and you're doing 4K 120, where both of these cameras are capable of A7S III and FX3 and FX6, by the way, also has that capability, and it has cooling fan. But when you're shooting for sports, for example, for hours and hours and hours, you do need a cooling fan to be able to shoot continuously without having to let the camera cool down and then stop shooting and start shooting. So that's really a big advantage as well. Although again, A7S III does phenomenally, but when especially like doing 4K 60p or 4K 120, obviously there is a limit. It's not as short as some of the cameras out there, but you still, I think we've had people shoot an hour or two with the A7S III, but I think the official hour is like you could go for hours, like 13 hours or so in a certain climate that they've checked and shoot continuously, given that you have supplied a power. Obviously your battery hasn't died and you have enough media in there. You could go basically for a long time.
Any other questions?
We have a list of questions here, Bob, we've collected from chat, and we can run down those. Eric had to leave, but I know he's going to be watching later on the recording, so we'll ask his questions. Will 4K 120 FPS be coming to the FX9 without needing the optional back?
At this time, the way that the way that it's planned and worked, the FX9 will have an external capable of 4K 120 with a need of the XDCA. So it's going to be in the form of RAW externally, and it will not be internally for the FX9. There's no plan at this time.
Okay, and then his follow-up question is, can you share anything about what future updates beyond V3 for it would include?
We have obviously, we're focused on the version 3. We've made some unofficial announcement, and we'll have more confirmed announcement coming up soon about what it includes. I think Paul alluded to some of the updates, being able to do Super 16 crop and RCP control. Those are the big requests from the market. Obviously, we're always listening and we're taking the feedback. And if there are no hardware limitations and the camera we can implement those changes, of course we do. Going back to a camera me and Paul are very familiar with, like the F55 was again one of the great cameras, and still is, that we are at the version 9 iteration of that. So somebody bought the camera years ago, with the firmware update we were able to implement multiple different feature sets and capability to these cameras based on the need of market. So at this point we're focused on version 3 obviously, but we keep listening to voice of customer and suggestion, and whatever is possible we'll send that up to Japan, and hopefully we'll have it in the future update.
Okay, great, thanks. I gotta say I have an A7 and an XD Cam EX, so some old ones, and I absolutely love those cameras. They just work. I just love them. So anyway, here Jeff Arballo had a few questions here. First one was, do you have any information on what updates might be coming for the FX6?
Uh, I don't at this point. I mean, the FX6 it's a very capable camera. Right? Again, we're open and communicating, but we haven't announced any updates for the FX6 currently. Obviously, we're always listening. Again, looking at the feedbacks and customer voice of customers. But the FX6, it's a very capable camera. I don't know exactly. Maybe you can specify what exactly you're looking for, because FX6 is a full frame camera. It has high sensitivity, it does high speed, a lot more capability. But there are, as Paul highlighted, differences between, for example, cache recording and things like that that the FX9 has. Obviously, that would be to make a camera more compact and affordable and modular as FX6 with all this power under the hood. Obviously, you have to cut some places, right? So there's certain things that you have to give away to be able to have that balance between the power and the size and the weight of the camera. But other than that, I mean, for the size, it's a powerful camera by itself. I can't think of, we don't have, honestly, let me put it that way. We don't have many requests on the FX6 that people want, and it already doesn't have it.
Okay, great.
And before I'll just add to it, the release cycle is quite recent for the FX6, so we usually have several months before we start to get a roadmap of additional firmware lines. But one thing to mention that has been added is additional lens options. The FX6 is a video camera; it's a motion camera for sure, and some of our power zoom lenses have been updated, or we've added more lenses to our lineup that basically work well in a video-centric application. So you can see those on our site. There's a couple. They end with the letter P, where they have a letter P in there as a power zoom, and so they're optimized to work in a video function. So that's some of the updates we've done for FX6, but as peripheral, of course.
Okay, and I don't know if Jeff Arbala wants to ask. He had a couple follow-up questions. Do you want to ask those, Jeff, or? I don't know if he's online. He seems to be muted. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and ask him for him then. He said he usually turns off the fan and the camera off during interviews. Will the camera shut it off if it gets too hot, or will it harm it in any way?
It really depends, right? The environment, the situation, what it is. I mean, you can be a really good judge, but the fan setting on a lot of these cameras, and let me go back to maybe FX6 again to show you guys. If you go to the fan setting in the menu, you actually see there are multiple options, and there is auto, and then there is minimum or off on record. So I think that's a good option to have if you think it. I think the fan is very quiet, but if you don't want to have it on auto or minimum, you can actually have an off on record time. So whenever you stop recording, then the fan can kick in and cool in. But again, there are lots of factors people need to consider. I mean, it's how are you powering the camera? If it's a battery, or are you using how much power consumption you're using from the camera? Are you using 4K 120, or are you using plain HD? It makes a big difference, right? So it's really, you have to play based on the environment or the type of shooting that you're doing. You can actually select, and each camera has similar type of menu, and that goes also for the FX3 as well. There's a high mood, low mood, and in the specific to FX3, you can actually turn off. There's a shut off mode, auto power off mode when the camera gets hot, and you can turn that off or put it on high. I think there's a normal setting and a high setting. If you put it on the high setting on the FX3 or A7S3 or those cameras, then it won't shut off. The camera gets pretty warm if you're using the 4K 120, but it'll keep going. But again, I can't tell you it's not going to harm you or the camera based on if you're running it. I tell you a story. I've been to a factory in Japan many times. I was actually surprised they have like actually heat and cold room over there that it simulates lots of these, and they run some tests. So usually I can only recommend going by what the spec of the camera is and what the official recommendation of Sony is. But Sony is very conservative when we spec the minimum and maximum temperature and things like that.
Okay. And skip down on the list here, get a few more. Is Mark Masonev was asking about any planned NAB style promotions coming up for these cameras?
That would be a marketing or business side question. I'm the engineer. I don't know, Paul, do you have any insight?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
then.
we've continuously extended our 0% financing program, which is still available. To the best of my knowledge, is still available. That's probably been the most popular program to basically have 0% financing for as much as 24 or 36 months, depending on the product and depending on what we're doing. NAB hasn't normally been a program for us necessarily to do discounts, but it is our fiscal year beginning as well, so we often see new plans come in April, May. We will be doing some alternative to NAB this year in the month, just to share any new and updates, and I expect at that time we'll be able to revisit what promos we might have. But yes, right now the most exciting is the 0% promos.
Okay, great. Thank you. And follow-up question for Mark was, what lenses work best for the autofocus feature on the FX3 and FX6?
As I mentioned, all of the G and G Master and Zeiss Sony lenses, Sony native E-mount lenses are the best, and they all work great. Obviously, and I alluded to this a little bit. I mean, a few years, as far as if you go 5 or 6 years back, there was only 4 lenses available in E-mount, and now there is only 60 something from Sony, and there are other manufacturers that they're making direct E-mount lenses as well, right? And some of them have autofocus capability and some of them don't. But it really comes down to the latest generation of our lenses, or for example, like the G Master lenses, the lenses you guys have seen we announced recently, the 50, the 35, and the 135 as going as back as a couple years ago. That's when we started switching to that new latest technology of the focus actuator. So they obviously those work the fastest and more precise and quietest with having the latest technology, but they're all working great. You guys saw some example. I mean, I have, and I don't have the G Master on all of them. When you guys were looking at the pictures and you can see the metadata, I mean, the FX9 has a 85 Zeiss 1.8 on there, and the FX6 has the 55 1.8 Zeiss in there, and the autofocus was working really great. And these lenses are not as pricey as some of the other lenses that they're out there. So, and I think on the FX3, I have the 2470 G Master 2.8 in there. So all of the lenses that comes from Sony are compatible G and G Master and Zeiss lenses. But definitely, if you're relying on autofocus, as I mentioned, you need to have native lenses. And lots of people, they use some of the third-party lenses with adapter, and they do work. But the simplest I can put it for you is they may work, but they take a longer detour to get there than having that native lens. As I mentioned, there is camera and lens talking together really fast and reacting to give you that great performance.
Okay, great. And one question here from Jim Staler is, what is considered a long recording time for such models, and is there a limit?
Like I said, there is no limit because of the heat and processing. Like I said, like a 4K 120, generally, there's some competitors out there, they only last about 8 or 10 minutes of recording before the camera overheats and shut down. So there is no shutdown in these. Like I said, they have cooling fan in there, so you can technically go for hours and hours. When I said, and I think Japan did a test with some underlying asterisk in there as to what the temperature and climate was and everything, but I think they shot 4K 60p, I believe, with the AC attached to it, external power for 13 hours. So it's and that's 4K 120. If you shooting regular recording, I mean, that's really, you can record forever and ever, and the cameras have relay mode that you can switch to media. As long as you have media and power, you can go forever onto these cameras.
Okay, then we only have time for a couple more quick questions from Daniel Oren. Is there an update on the FX9 firmware roadmap?
Yeah, like we talked about. So version 3,
Okay.
it's our focus, that we're adding a couple of extra things that we've already announced and committed. So the big ones are obviously 4K 120 externally. It's coming with an external recorder through the RAW on the case of FX9, and then we have the RCP control or a 700 protocol that you can actually control a paint box or RCP, and then adding a Super 16 will give you guys ability to go to Super 16 mode to basically maybe utilize your lens for different angle of views and being able to shoot in addition to full frame and the 4K Super 35 currently. You can also go to Super 16 2K in the middle, but also give you ability to put like a B4 or 2/3 inch lens with an adapter, obviously, in front of the camera, and being able with a minimal light loss, you can use a traditional broadcast engine lens with it. That's coming with the version 3. So that's we've tried to compact as much as possible in version 3, and obviously after that, if there are additional updates, we plan and we'll make an announcement.
Okay, well, I think we're running out of time for questions here, so we'll pass.
Sorry, I give you guys long answers, I guess, on lots of those questions.
No,
Okay,
that's
thank
great
you.
stuff. Oh my gosh, we really feel like we've really been into it now, and the recording's going to be there for reference purposes, and it's going to be a great asset for us. We thank you very much.
Is there a way that you might be able to answer any other questions? Like, do you want to give out your email address, or how would people get other questions answered?
Yeah, I guess you could relay the question. I don't know, Paul, maybe you want to be the point of contact the folks, and definitely they can reach out, and we'll be available.
Yeah, you can certainly reach out through me, Bob. I might also mention, if it's going to YouTube, we could look to see if there's an active chat in the YouTube video and keep it as a record for you as well. If that would benefit everybody at once, we can monitor your video's chat area as well.
I have a full list of questions here, so I can forward those to Bob, and we can work from there.
Perfect. Well, I hope the information was useful for you guys. Thank you so much again for your time, and keep the questions, keep the requests coming. As I mentioned, part of my job and Paul's job is listening to you guys, and the products you see, like Venice and FX9 and FX6, FX3, all of these cameras have come basically based on your need, based on what you guys need, and keep those coming, and we'll try to support as much as possible.
So team, I'd also like to share one link, verbally just share one link that would be additional education if you wanted to continue the research afterwards. We have a site called Sony Cine, so SonyCine.com. That site has a slew of articles based on the entire product line that would just be great independent research if you want to continue reviewing any more of the tech features of our cameras, as well as stories from filmmakers and peers. So yes. Sorry, Jane, I think you were going to say something though, Jane.
Oh, Paul, that's fine. I was just going to wrap things up, but Bob, did you want to do the final thank you? And then I just have a couple of announcements on behalf of MediaPros.
Yeah. Other than saying thank you, I'm not sure what else to say. Thank you. I'll leave it to you, however much more thank you want to say.
Oh, sounds good. Well, I want to say thank you to Shapur and to Paul, but then also to everyone who joined us today. This was the first time we have tried a noon meeting, and it looks like we had a very engaged turnout. So to all of you who were here, thank you very much for joining us for What's New With, something new we wanted to try for MediaPros. And then just a quick promo for our next regular meeting, which will be on Wednesday, April 28th. Do I have the day right? It will be on Wednesday. And we have a special guest speaker that night. Scott Valentine will be with us. He is putting together, we're going to talk about film distribution. He's putting together a new OTT streaming network. And you may also remember Scott as one of the characters on Family Ties, a very popular show in the 1980s for those of you who don't remember. So keep an eye on our website and on our Facebook page. And we will see you again in just a couple weeks for our next regular meeting. Thanks again to Sony for such great information today. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
You.
Bye.
It's a great get together. Thank you. Okay, I'm